Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to this series of lectures on European history, and I am Shankar Kumar. I teach history at Hindu College here in University of Delhi, and today we are here to talk about the Enlightenment. And as a student of history, we are going to look at not the theoretical formulations of Enlightenment thinkers as such. You must be reminded of the names of Voltaire, Rousseau and so forth, Montesquieu and so forth as part of the big league of Enlightenment thinkers, but that's not what we are going to talk about. We are looking at the travel of the ideas enunciated by these Enlightenment scholars, the biggies, across time, and therefore we would be looking at the historiography of these Enlightenment ideas. And in this process of tracking the formulation and dissemination of these ideas, what we discover interestingly, and that is something that is revealed in the new school of historiography or history writing around the Enlightenment ideas or intellectual history, is that there wasn't this kind of a thing like something emanating from Europe, from Western Europe, and in time traveling to other parts of the world. So, this diffusionist model of Enlightenment is something that is getting questioned of late in the historical writings. So, what actually emerges in this exercise is the existence of varied ways in which people over time have sought to look at Enlightenment ideas, its profundity, its spread, its universal appeal and so forth. So, quite a few attributes of these Enlightenment ideas like liberty, citizenship, nationality, republic and so forth, or for that matter even slavery and so forth, individualism, or market, they are all over a period of time changing ideas. And what is bequeathed to us may not exactly be what these big Enlightenment thinkers might have spoken about. So, what I am hinting at is that these ideas also have a history, and therefore it is important for us to track the course of that history, to understand at what point of time different meanings got attributed to a particular idea, and the way we receive it today or the way we understand it today is not exactly the replica of what these Enlightenment thinkers, the biggies, were writing about. So, that is what emerges overall. So, this interaction is broken into two parts, and one is the conventional historiography, and as you can see on your slide, the dominant narrative. So, the dominant narrative is something that you and I have studied at our school textbook level, where Enlightenment or the Enlightenment is told to us as the sign of the modern, and modernity is supposed to have begun with the writings of these Enlightenment scholars, particularly located in Western France, and this understanding, this dominant narrative makes us understand or makes us agree to some kind of a Eurocentric mythology. So, it's a mythology, it's a creation. It may not exactly be the way it is sought to be created. So, it's grafted on us in a story form that, okay, this is how it traveled and so forth. When you do the actual dissection of it with respect to its temporality and spatiality, the story somewhat appears to be different, and that is what we shall be talking about in the next part of this interaction in the historiography 2, which is a sequel to what we are doing at this moment in this 30-minute of interaction. So, the dominant narrative also tells us that the global reach of Enlightenment ideas was actually energized by Europe and Europe alone. So, there is some kind of a patrimony of these ideas which I just told you about, be it liberty, be it individualism, be it market, be it citizenship, be it nationality or nation state and so forth. So, somehow in this dominant historiography or in the dominant narrative, it appears that it all began in Europe and nowhere else, and it is from here that it traveled to different parts of the world. So, it posits Europe as the original and autonomous area from where it emerged. So, the idea of the Occident in contrast to what they discovered in the Orient when they started engaging with the eastern part of Asia, India included. So, they discovered it's a kind of manufactured notion, I would say. As an alternative to this dominant narrative, we have the global history perspective, which is emerging of late over the last 2-3 decades in a very big way, and it somewhat decenters the location of or epicenter of these ideas in terms of Europe. So, it challenges the conventional narrative's obsession with European origins, but that is not what we are discussing at this moment. That the alternative global perspective is something that we would discuss in the sequel to this interaction, that is in the historiography 2 part of this that will follow. So, let us try and understand as to what the attributes of this dominant narrative are, and what are the salient features of this dominant narrative with which we are rather familiarized, because that's the mainstream narrative of Enlightenment as well, which we have studied at our school level also. And when we get down to this exercise, what we find is that here in this dominant narrative or the conventional historiography, I would say, the Enlightenment is projected as being seeped, is totally immersed in the cultural traditions of the Occident, and therefore, there is some kind of uniqueness to this. So, these are ideas that were unique to Western Europe, right? These are ideas that could not have emerged elsewhere, and there is some element of purity about these ideas that emerged only in Europe. So, that's one notion that emerges from this dominant narrative. Similarly, we also get to see in the dominant narrative that Enlightenment ideas constituted one of the foundational premises of Western modernity. So, modernity, the way it gets defined to us in the mainstream historiography around Enlightenment, is the Eurocentric definition of modernity. So, whatever they wrote or the way it unfolded in the 18th century European history, that is the time when most of these ideas were current and were being written and spoken about. Although you will discover that they within Europe also they traveled, they have their own shades, and it were retold by different agencies. That is something that you will discover when you examine the role of Enlightenment ideas in triggering the iconic French Revolution. Now, by the time French Revolution began, say in 1789, most of the big, Enlightenment thinkers were already gone. So you did not have Voltaire, you did not have Montesquieu, you did not have several other biggies with whom we tend to identify the Enlightenment as such. So they are gone. So who are the people who are still clinging on to these ideas? How these ideas are traveling? You will find that there are some people who are fashioning themselves on the lines of these thinkers who are sitting in say salons, who are being looked after by several royal ladies who are sponsoring these discussions. So they would sit, eat and dine, and they would talk about these ideas. So some kind of a public sphere is emerging, is getting manufactured, and they played a tremendous role in at least making it known to the public that nation is a possibility, nationality is a possibility. Much before French Revolution began, people had started referring to themselves as citizens, right? And politically they were subjects under a monarch. But so this kind of a fashion had gained currency. So what do we find is that and how are they articulating it? They are publishing some small pamphlets, or they are writing for some journals, even pornographic literature, something very coming very close to pornographic literature, where the Queen is derided to vulgar extent, and that demolished the bigger than life imageries of royalty in the minds of the public, right, in the minds of the common people. So much so that after Louis XVI, along with his wife, was trying to flee France during the initial 2 years of the unfolding of the revolution, and when he was caught and they were brought back, you do find in some of the paintings where the guards are not even facing them. They have turned their back to them. And that was, you can say, a royal insult to the imageries with which French population had or French subject had lived for centuries together. So they had some kind of currency. Even these ideas had some kind of a currency, but they had transformed. They were not exactly defined and articulated the way John Locke or Montesquieu or Voltaire would talk about it, right? So that is what I mean when we say that within Europe also you have shades of opinions and creations of these Enlightenment ideas in 18th century itself, towards the closing decades of the 18th century itself, right at the time when French Revolution is about to begin. So these big guns who I just referred to, be it Hobbes, Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu or Rousseau, who are part of that culture, that elite club of philosophies, it's a French word, they are the ones who are giving these big ideas, and over time it gets diffused from that epicenter to other parts of the world, or to the other parts of the world. Why? Because they were essentially universal. So that's the take, that's the flavor that we get, that there was some innate charm in these ideas that made them universal. So people as it traveled across 18th century and 19th century and 20th century in different parts of the world, people were seductively sucked into the universal charm of these ideas. So that's the picture that we get. In the next part of the lecture, we will critique this, that this is not the way it perhaps would have happened. Right. So these are some of the segments that are getting critiqued in the modern trend of historiography around Enlightenment. Similarly, another important thing that we glean from the conventional writing around Enlightenment is the sense of linearity of quite a few iconic historical events, processes characterizing early modern Europe, or you can say characterizing the initial couple of decades of modern Europe. So there is some kind of a sequential presentation of the Renaissance that all of us know. It happened around 15th, 16th century in Europe to begin with, from Italy, and then taking in its ambit other parts of Europe. Humanism, which was the centerpiece of Renaissance, humans as the best creation of God, and humans are accorded centrality in the narrative around Renaissance, or the cultural efflorescence that we understand as Renaissance. Humans are at the center of it. Human concern is at the center of it. Beauty of humanity is at the center of it. Then that Renaissance and humanism leads to Reformation, which is like going back to the reforms of Catholic Church. So whatever ills or corruption had entered Catholic Church, they were sought to be done away with as part of Reformation, and that energy premised on reason is already in the air, and it is this that gives impetus to the intellectual and scientific development, leading to, in the 17th century, scientific revolution, and ultimately culminates in the Enlightenment movement of the 18th century, or Enlightenment writings of the 18th century, exemplified in the writings of the iconic thinkers that we just spoke about. Now, this resulted in the dominant historiography. This is how it is presented, that this sequence from Renaissance, humanism, Reformation to scientific development to Enlightenment resulted in transforming the world into the one that was characterized by the individual. So individualism, atomized individuals, is a byproduct of this sequential development of European history, culminating in the writings of Enlightenment. Human rights, rationalization, and disenchantment of the world. Disenchantment of the world is a term used by Max Weber, and he refers to this with reference to disenchantment from the church ordained source or church ordained knowledge system or instructions, and humans or people in Europe came to premise their knowledge on reason rather than believing on what the church had to say. So that revealed truth is replaced by reasoned truth. And there is a kind of linearity that runs across these events, these historical epochs in European history, right from Renaissance, humanism, across to Reformation, across to scientific revolution, culminating in the Enlightenment and heralding of the modernity. And these are the shining symbols of modernity: individualism, human rights, rationalization, disenchantment, and secularization of almost everything except religion, so forth. So let me sum it up by quoting William McNeill, who wrote in his work Rise of the West, and he says, and I quote, you can see it on your slide: "We and all the world of the 20th century are peculiarly the creatures and heirs of a handful of geniuses of early modern Europe." So this brilliantly sums up the flavor of the traditional historical writings around the Enlightenment. So this is how they tend to present the narrative. This is how they build the narrative. So there is some kind of a privileging of Western Europe and the big Enlightenment thinkers, and the durability and the fact that these ideas are still current in the 21st century is accorded to not any other agency outside Europe, but it is very localized. It is very specialized. It all emerged from one place, and that is Western Europe, and it emerged from the writings of these wonderful scholars, and it somehow presents its spread across 18th and 19th century and 20th century to different parts of the world in terms of being a passive recipient of these ideas, and not as some kind of an active agent. So be it Asia, be it Latin America, be it China, be it India, they are maybe in this dominant historiography, it so emerges that we were all wonderstruck by the sheer charm and power of these articulations of Enlightenment thinkers, and that's how we sought to transform ourselves. That's how we sought to reform ourselves. And there is no active agency of the people or society engaging with these ideas, and there is no dynamic agency accorded to the subject population, be it imperialism. So even the imperial conquest that was initiated by the West across the globe, somehow these ideas come alongside as a thing, as a substance, and over a period of time it got distributed, it got disseminated to a wider audience, and that is how over a period of time it became universal, because everyone was aware of these ideas that was first enunciated in their writings, Enlightenment thinker writings. So that's the trajectory that they draw in the conventional portrayal of Enlightenment. In the next part of this interaction, we will critique this proposition and look at the alternative model that I just spoke about, which tends to study this phenomena in a global perspective. So that's it for the day, and thank you.